My own daughter looked me in the eye and said, "Dad's family will live here now, you should leave." I raised her, I paid for that house, and just like that, I was being pushed out. But the twist, the very next week, everything fell apart. She came running back. Before we start our story, most people just watch and scroll without subscribing. But I know you're not one of them, right? If you enjoy these stories, I'm counting on you. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button now. Let's dive into the story. I always thought I had raised my daughter right, taught her to be strong, respectful, and compassionate. But that illusion shattered the day she looked me dead in the eye and said, without a hint of hesitation, "Dad's family will live here now. You should probably make other arrangements." I stared at her, stunned, as if she had just declared the sky green or gravity optional. For a moment, I waited for a smirk, a laugh, any sign she was joking, but she wasn't. She just blinked at me like this was a perfectly reasonable thing to ask your own mother, in the very house I had paid for, cleaned, protected, and built memories in for nearly 3 decades. My husband had passed away 2 years earlier. His family hadn't lifted a finger to help us then. No casseroles, no visits, no support for me or their only grandchild. But now they were interested conveniently around the time my late husband's will went through probate and the house was officially in my daughter's name. Something we had agreed on years ago for tax reasons, thinking we were just being smart about the future. Now I realized how naive I had been. My daughter, Sarah, 25 and newly independent, had changed in subtle ways since she met Evan, her new boyfriend. He was charming on the surface, but I saw through it. Always calculating, always too involved in Sarah's financial decisions. He convinced her that keeping the house was a legacy move, that she was honoring her father by inviting his side of the family to fill the space with love again. I tried to reason with her, reminded her how absent they'd been when we needed them most. How her father's brother once told me I was too controlling for expecting help with funeral arrangements, but Sarah wouldn't hear it. She said I was clinging to control, that I was being territorial. I felt like a stranger in my own kitchen while she poured wine for people who used to whisper about me at weddings. That night, I sat alone in the bedroom I had shared with her father. I packed 2 suitcases, not because I accepted her decision, but because I knew staying would poison our relationship beyond repair. She had made her choice, however misguided, and I wasn't going to grovel for space in a house I had poured my life into. I left her a note, calm and precise, letting her know I hoped she found peace in her decision, and that I would take some time to clear my head. No guilt-tripping, no emotional blackmail, just space. I moved into a short-term rental not far from town, just enough privacy to think, but close enough to keep an eye on the inevitable unraveling. And it didn't take long. By the end of the week, I got a call not from Sarah, but from Evan's aunt, of all people. She thought I should know that Sarah hadn't been seen at the house in 3 days. Apparently, Evan's mother had taken over the master bedroom. His cousin brought her dog, which chewed up Sarah's designer heels. Sarah had tried setting some rules, but Evan told her she was being dramatic. The house wasn't hers, he reminded her. It's ours. It belongs to the family. Those were his exact words, the aunt said. And that's when I smiled, not out of cruelty, but from the slow satisfaction of watching someone finally see the difference between blood and boundaries. Sarah had inherited my stubbornness, no doubt about it, but she hadn't inherited my foresight. She believed people wouldn't take more than they were given, that family ties were enough to guarantee respect. I had spent my life proving otherwise. I knew exactly how this would play out, and it was already happening quicker than I expected. By Friday, Sarah was staying at Evan's apartment, crying to friends about how everything felt out of control. I didn't call her. I let her sit in the discomfort she had created. She needed to understand that love doesn't mean sacrifice without return, and loyalty doesn't mean laying down for people just because they share a last name. But even I didn't predict what happened next. The message came on a Sunday afternoon, just as I was debating whether to go for a walk or open another bottle of wine. It was from Sarah, short and clipped. "Can we talk?" No emojis, no pleasantries, just 3 words weighed down with the kind of regret she'd never admit out loud. I waited 15 minutes before replying, not because I was playing games, but because I needed to collect myself. I wasn't going to be her emotional airbag again, not after what she'd done. We met at a neutral spot, a little cafe we used to go to before her father got sick. She looked exhausted, no makeup, sweater too big for her frame, fingers nervously drumming against her coffee cup. I said nothing. I let the silence stretch until she broke it. I messed up, she finally said, eyes fixed on the table. They won't leave. She explained how it started. Small Evan's mom rearranging the living room, saying the old setup made her anxious. Then came the fridge, stocked with food Sarah didn't eat. The television had been monopolized by Evan's uncle, who insisted on blaring political rants while chain-smoking in the sunroom. One of the cousins brought over a friend who started crashing on the couch. When Sarah confronted Evan about the chaos, he accused her of not understanding what it meant to be part of a real family. That's when it hit her. She said, this wasn't about honoring her father or preserving memories. This was about control. Evan had never loved her for her. He loved the house, the status, the narrative. But the part that twisted the knife was what happened that morning. Sarah had come home early from a friend's place, hoping to shower and regroup, only to find Evan's mother rifling through her jewelry box. She claimed she was just organizing it, but several pieces were missing. Sarah didn't confront her. She didn't scream. She just walked out, sat in her car, and cried until she couldn't feel her face. That's when she texted me. I didn't say I told you so. I didn't need to. My silence was loud enough. Sarah asked if she could stay with me for a while. She had no idea what her rights were anymore. The house was legally hers, yes, but she had let too many lines blur. Now she was scared to sleep there alone, afraid of the confrontation, afraid of Evan. I let her stay with me, but I didn't make it easy. She had to understand that actions had consequences not just for her, but for the people she hurt along the way. I wasn't going to comfort her through every tear. I made it clear this wasn't forgiveness. This was temporary support while she figured out her next move. She started small, changing the Wi-Fi password, removing their names from utilities, locking certain rooms. But Evan pushed back. He called her manipulative, accused her of emotional abuse, said she was exiling his family during a vulnerable time. Sarah began documenting everything: photos of trashed rooms, voicemails from Evan laced with veiled threats, text messages that dripped with gas. I helped her find a lawyer. Quiet, competent, and not at all interested in drama, just results. He explained her rights, walked her through the eviction process, and advised her to stop all non-essential communication with Evan and his family. It would take time, he warned, but it was doable. In the meantime, Sarah got a job. Nothing glamorous, just something to rebuild her independence. She also started seeing a therapist, someone she could unpack her guilt and confusion with. I watched the daughter I used to know slowly re-emerge, less naive this time, more guarded, but also stronger. She was learning the hard way that love doesn't erase entitlement, and that real family doesn't need to dominate to feel connected. We had dinners again, quiet ones, sometimes strained, sometimes tender. There were apologies, not all at once, but in layers. She'd look at me and whisper, "I didn't know it would get this bad." And I'd respond, "You didn't want to see it. That's not the same." And just when it seemed like things were finally beginning to stabilize, Evan escalated. He threatened to sue Sarah for emotional damages, claiming her abandonment of the shared living space had caused him mental distress. He even hinted at taking over the house entirely through common law occupancy. That's when I stepped in, not just as her mother, but as someone who'd been through enough to recognize when a line had officially been crossed. Never thought I'd find myself consulting a private investigator, but there I was, sipping coffee across from a man named Rick who looked like he'd walked straight out of a crime novel. Sarah didn't know I hired him at first. I didn't want her to. She was too emotionally raw, too tangled in her guilt to see the bigger picture. But I saw it. I knew Evan wasn't just some mooching boyfriend with a loud family. He was methodical. Everything he had done, from isolating Sarah to slowly taking over the house, was part of a pattern, and I had a sick feeling he'd done it before. I wasn't wrong. Within 2 weeks, Rick returned with a folder thick with printed screenshots, email threads, and records from 2 previous states. Evan had a record of short-term relationships with women who had assets, not enough to land him in jail, but enough to ruin reputations, drain bank accounts, and walk away without consequences. In one case, he had lived rent-free in a condo for nearly a year before the woman filed for a restraining order. In another, he convinced a single mom to co-sign on a car loan, then disappeared and left her with the debt. But he had been careful, never legally tying himself to property or financial paperwork. Just enough involvement to muddy the waters, but never enough to get pinned. Sarah needed to see this for herself, so I handed her the folder and watched her face change. First disbelief, then humiliation, then fury. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just sat quietly, reading every line, as if memorizing every betrayal. When she finally looked up, she said, "He thinks he's the only one who can play the long game. He has no idea who raised me." That's when the plan shifted from defense to offense. Sarah changed all the locks, installed cameras, and filed an official police report regarding the missing jewelry. She followed her lawyer's advice to the letter, served formal eviction notices to each of the house guests, and began legal proceedings to prevent Evan from stepping foot inside again. But that was just the beginning. She also filed a civil suit for damages, citing emotional distress and unauthorized occupation of private property. She reported Evan's unregistered income from flipping stolen electronics, something Rick had uncovered through a dummy Facebook Marketplace account. And, as the final nail in the coffin, Sarah anonymously submitted all of Evan's past scams to a Reddit thread in a support community for women who had been emotionally manipulated out of property and finances. The post blew up. Hundreds of comments, dozens of shares, and eventually, 2 women from different cities reached out, confirming similar patterns. Screenshots were exchanged. Names were matched. A coordinated report was filed with state authorities. Evan went silent. His family tried to stir things up, at first called Sarah ungrateful, called me a bitter old woman, but when the legal notices kept coming, they started packing. One by one, they left the house. Not with apologies or dignity, but with slurs, under their breath and threats they couldn't legally carry out. Evan held out the longest. He thought he could wear her down, but when the court order landed at his feet, and the footage of him yelling threats at Sarah made its way to the police, he finally backed off. But Sarah wasn't done. She took the money from a small inheritance, something she had been saving for years, and completely renovated the house, not for comfort, for closure. She changed the furniture, repainted the walls, replaced every piece that had ever held his fingerprints. The master bedroom became a study. The room Evan's cousin had destroyed became a walk-in closet. The living room got new locks, new curtains, and a sensor that triggered an alert if anyone uninvited stepped onto the porch. And she began hosting, not parties, purposeful gatherings, book clubs, women's circles, workshops about legal empowerment and asset protection. She turned that house into a place of healing, not just for her but for other women who had once felt as stupid, used, and ashamed as she had. And when people asked why she opened her home like this, she simply said, "Because someone once made me feel like I didn't belong in my own house. I swore I'd never let anyone else feel that powerless again." I watched it all unfold, not as the mother who once felt betrayed, but as a witness to what happens when someone finally steps into their own power. Evan faded into the background, right where cowards belong. Sarah never responded to his last message, which said only, "You'll regret this someday." She just blocked the number, looked at me, and said, "The only thing I regret is not believing you sooner." Months passed. The air in my rental felt lighter now, like the dust had finally settled after a long, suffocating storm. I still hadn't moved back into the house, even though Sarah had offered. She said it was mine as much as hers, that she'd made a mistake and wanted me to come home, but I wasn't ready. Not because I was bitter, but because something inside me had changed too. Watching my daughter fall and rise, stumble and fight back, had reminded me of parts of myself I'd buried after years of marriage, caregiving, and constant quiet sacrifice. I had spent so long defining myself as a wife, then as a widow, and then as a mother who kept everything together. But now, I was just me. And for the first time in years, I was curious about who that woman really was. Sarah kept moving forward, step by determined step. She sold Evan's leftover junk, even the broken electronics, and donated the proceeds to a shelter for women escaping financial abuse. She wrote a blog post about her experience, not for sympathy, but as a warning. It went viral within a week. Other women shared their stories. Some thanked her. Some admitted they were still living with their own versions of Evan. She responded to every single message, not with pity, but with clarity and conviction. She had become something I hadn't expected, not just strong, but transformative. And in doing so, she helped me remember my own strength too. I eventually bought a small townhouse on the edge of town. Nothing extravagant, but entirely mine. paid in full with the savings I had squirreled away over the years, the emergency money I never thought I'd use. I furnished it slowly, deliberately. Every piece I brought in had to spark joy. As cheesy as that sounds, no more keeping things because they might be useful or he liked that style. This space was for me. Just me. Sarah and I started seeing each other every week again. We'd get lunch or go to the market together. Sometimes we'd just sit on the back porch of her reclaimed house and talk. Really talk. She asked about my past. I asked about her future. We learned each other again. This time as two women, not just mother and daughter. There were moments of pain, little landmines of old hurt that still needed time to heal. But the forgiveness came naturally, the way sunlight returns after a storm without asking permission. Then, one day, out of nowhere, Sarah received a letter in the mail. Not from Evan. He'd gone completely silent. This was from a woman named Danielle, someone neither of us knew. It was handwritten, polite, and horrifying. Danielle had been dating Evan for 3 months. He had introduced himself under a fake last name, claimed he had escaped a toxic relationship and was trying to rebuild his life, but Danielle had stumbled on Sarah's blog post while Googling his name, and suddenly everything clicked. She enclosed screenshots, messages, receipts, everything. Evan was already setting up his next scam. Sarah didn't cry. She didn't get angry. She called Danielle, calmly, and walked her through everything. She didn't speak like a victim. She spoke like someone who had walked through fire and survived. She gave Danielle resources, the lawyer's contact, even offered to testify if needed. And then she hung up and went for a walk, like it was just another Tuesday. When she came back, she said, "He's never going to stop, is he?" I said, "No, but you did. You broke the pattern. That's all we can ever really do. I don't think Evan will ever face true justice. Men like him rarely do. He'll move, change his name again, find another woman to drain. But this time, there's a paper trail, a digital one. His face, his patterns, his tricks, they're out there now. And every time he tries to crawl into someone else's life, there's a better chance someone will see him coming."
As for us, we're different now. Stronger, sharper, less inclined to ignore red flags for the sake of peace. The house, the drama, the chaos, it's all behind us. Sarah's future is hers to build, and I'm finally building my own too. And maybe that's the real revenge, not the lawsuits, not the blog posts, not even the public exposure. The real revenge is thriving after someone tried to tear you apart. It's reclaiming your space, your voice, your peace, and refusing to hand it over ever again. I got one last message from Evan months later. An email, from a new address. No threats this time. Just 3 words, "You ruined everything." I didn't even open it. I just stared at the subject line for a second, smiled to myself, and hit delete. Then I poured myself a glass of wine, stepped out onto my little balcony, and watched the sun go down, finally, completely, without anyone else's shadow falling over me.